In 1965, a teenager in Daytona Beach got a Harley-Davidson motorcycle for Christmas, and 2 months later, it was wrecked. Not scratched, but wrecked. And his kid brother had a guitar, brand new, sitting there untouched, because the teenager had already tried playing once and quit out of boredom. With nothing else to do, he turned to his brother and said, "Teach me a lick or two." And that teenager was Duane Allman. His brother was Greg. And within 6 years, that moment of boredom would produce one of the most locked-in live bands in American rock, captured on a series of shows that became one of the greatest live albums of the era. This is the story of how a 5-year stretch of exhausting club work built that chemistry, and how Duane came out of it with a genuinely strange theory about what music was actually for. The Allman Brothers Band was playing a 3-night stand at the Fillmore East in New York, sharing the bill with Johnny Winter and Evan Bishop, and recording the shows that would become their breakthrough live record. Bishop, it turned out, had spent years cataloging vintage rhythm and blues singles onto cassette tapes. Not novelty stuff, but the real dark, obscure Southern R&B that most of these musicians had grown up on. He had typed up a track list as thick as a phone book, and several members of the band stayed up with him until 8 in the morning just listening. That kind of dedication wasn't a Fillmore Week indulgence, it was the exact lifestyle that had built the band in the first place. Before the record deal, Duane and Greg spent their teenage years grinding through the Southern club circuit in a series of bands, playing 5 sets a night, 6 nights a week, for whatever a small club would pay. Duane didn't even need a diploma to do it. He had already dropped out in 9th grade, telling a teacher flatly that he'd learned everything he needed to. What he needed instead was to survive that circuit, and the circuit itself did the sorting. Anybody not fully committed washed out. What remained after enough sleepless nights and dingy hotel rooms was a small group of musicians who were lean, a little worn down, and completely sure of what they could do. Barry Oakley's route into the band tells the same story from a different city. He grew up in Chicago. Started playing guitar around 14 after a casual dare with some friends. "Let's start a band," they said, half joking. And by 17, a touring Southern band came through town, short a guitar player after one of theirs got drafted. Oakley said yes, packed up within a couple of days, and never really lived in Chicago again. That's how the band came together, not through auditions or a plan, but through the same repeated process of guys getting filtered out or filtered in by circumstance and sheer stamina. By the time all 6 members had settled in Macon, each one already knew he was good, because the road had already proven it to him the hard way. And it wasn't just the 6 musicians. The band traveled with a crew that functioned less like employees and more like an extended, fiercely loyal family. A sound man named Mike, a member of the crew known as Red Dog, drivers, equipment handlers. Nobody on the outside was allowed to call it an organization, and the people inside it agreed. It was just a group of people who worked hard, looked out for each other, and shared something they didn't explain to outsiders. What that crew was protecting night after night was a very specific and very deliberate live sound, and it came down to 2 structural choices. The first was double drumming. Jai Johanni Johansson and Butch Trucks playing full kits together, not trading off, creating a rhythm section that hit twice as hard as a standard 4-piece setup. The second was the guitar arrangement between Duane and Dickie Betts. Instead of the usual rhythm guitar and lead guitar splits, the 2 of them played interlocking lead lines, circling each other. One writer at the time compared them to a pair of hunting falcons. Neither part was subordinate to the other. And that's a genuinely unusual choice for a rock band in 1971, and it's a big part of why the group could sustain long, improvisational passages without ever sounding like it was just filling time. But for Duane, none of this was really about volume or technical showmanship. Backstage that same Fillmore weekend, he laid out something closer to a personal philosophy, and it's worth hearing close to how he actually said it. He believed everybody should get a degree in musical education. Specifically, he said, at least 6 years of piano, so that eventually people could communicate feelings directly through a shared musical key instead of talking. He'd read a science fiction novel built around that exact idea, a world where people played instruments instead of speaking, and it clearly stuck with him. His own version of it was blunt. If everybody in the world played harmonica instead of talking, and someone was having a rough time, 6 or 8 people could just gather around and play him back up. Kind of sounds like a stone tangent until you watch him actually live it out, which he did constantly. The band's dressing room that weekend had, by Duane's own account, 14 people on stage at once at various points, and an open-door policy backstage for anyone who could play. The clearest example came when a Swiss concert promoter turned up. A man in his 40s who ran an annual festival back home and had trouble getting his English out clearly. He'd come to try to book the band for the following year. At some point, he opened his briefcase, and instead of paperwork, it was full of harmonicas in different keys. Duane, confused, asked what they were for. The promoter said simply, "I play." Duane brought him into the dressing room to prove it, and the guy played extremely well. Duane's reaction, cleaned up slightly for delivery, was something like, "What are you doing booking gigs? Why don't you come play with my band?" And that promoter was almost certainly Claude Nobbs, the actual founder of the Montreux Jazz Festival. The interview transcript spells his name differently, likely just a mishearing on tape, but the age, the accent, and the role, it all lines up. That single encounter is basically Duane's whole worldview in miniature. Music as a thing that dissolves the distance between a working promoter and a touring rock band, in about 90 seconds without either one saying much of anything useful. It shows up in how he talked, too. The writer covering that Fillmore weekend noticed that Duane didn't really construct sentences so much as let them run. His phrasing had the same loose, fluid quality as his slide playing. Like his speech and his guitar work came out of the same instinct. He wasn't performing confidence. He said plainly that the people would just come out and hear the band. He knew they'd like what they heard. And he meant it as a simple fact, not a boast. That's really the through line of the whole story. 5 years of a brutal, repetitive circuit that could have easily made this band cynical, instead forced them to strip everything down to the one thing that mattered. Playing well enough and locked in enough that words became almost unnecessary. The road didn't just produce technical skill, it produced a band that trusted each other completely, and a guitarist who decided, half seriously, that this was how humans were supposed to talk to each other in the first place. By that Fillmore East weekend, the proof was already on stage every night. Even on an off night, there was hardly anyone in that era who could outplay them. Within a year, they wouldn't be sharing a bill with anyone.